Salam everyone and welcome once again to the Sri Sathya Sai Media Center. With pranams at Bhagawan's lotus feet, we are here to continue the series on Mrs Ratanlal, a diamond of a devotee. This is the fourth part in this series, and earlier we shared with you how Bhagawan entered her life in a lightning manner in 1965, how Swami cured Mr. Ratanlal of his sinusitis, how Swami completely transformed his perspective in life, how Swami cured Mrs. Ratanlal of her chronic ulcer. Then we talked about their first visit to Parthi, her zeal to cook for Bhagawan, no matter how trying the situation was, and the sudden trip to Parthi that they made in July 1966 for Mrs. Ratanlal's birthday, and the revelations that happened during that trip, the way Bhagawan stunned them by letting them know how he was present at every step during that journey. And as we spoke about whatever has happened in their life in the years 1965 and 1966, we paused at various instances, we reflected, and beautifully amazing lessons emerged, isn't it, Prem?
Absolutely. And as we've seen, the journey was pretty quick. Very swiftly they moved closer to Swami, and in many ways Swami was drawing them not merely physically, but even through their hearts. They were being more and more attached to Swami, and that was the time we had stopped. In fact, there was one episode during that impromptu visit that they made, which we wanted to speak about. She mentions that it was her birthday for which they had come, but it was also the Guru Purnima time. So one of the things that happens in the interview room when Swami was giving them the interview, as she beautifully narrates, is Swami invites all the Nadaswaram people. Like we all know that we refer to that as Mangalavadhyam. Whenever there is any auspicious festival or occurrence in a family, we use the Nadaswaram troupe as people who give us the musical refrain. So Swami had invited this Nadaswaram troupe, and as he always does, he gifted them, he materialized objects, blessed them. For Swami, everyone's equal, right? You don't have to be a Raja, as we're going to see, or you have to be a prince or a plebeian, as they would say. Everybody is equal to Swami, and Swami gives everyone, and Swami blesses everyone. But when Swami gives something to a devotee, it is a gift of grace, right? But when Swami gives something to a person who has offered a service, that can be seen differently. So they thought, here is Swami, who's probably doing settlements by gifting things through materialization. And somehow this news spread, and for good reason, as we will come to see. It reaches the government in the form of a complaint probably, and promptly the government sends a vigilance officer. In fact, they send one of their most diligent vigilance officer, a person by name Ramchand. He's actually the vigilance commissioner, as Mrs. Ratanlal speaks of.
Because of all the stories of materializations.
Right, materializations, and I'm sure they must have been waiting for a chance.
And there will be always people
right,
waiting to do all these work of complaining.
Right, absolutely.
Yes.
And they must have just been waiting for an opportunity like this to investigate into the matter. And this very diligent officer, very sincere, and a very senior officer was sent to Prashanti Nilayam. His name was Ramchand. And his duty was to go and investigate what is happening here. Where are all these gifts coming from? And that is the point where we actually stopped Mrs. Ratanlal's interview, and she speaks about what happens to Mr. Ramchand, who has come as a representative of the government to investigate into what is this Sai Baba phenomenon, right? And what he undergoes as an experience in Prashanti Nilayam is very beautiful, and that is the narration that follows. We're going to play for you her narration of this episode, and then we will come back to you with our reflections.
अभी ये रामचंद बेचारा सुबह से लेके शाम तक जो devotees आए उनको पूछे ये वो. 6 months he stayed in the ashram. I had a partner, Russian partner. वो अपने बैरे को ले गई Switzerland. There he developed cancer. She sent him back. I was working for cancer also. तो मैंने उसको बोला, when I took her to the cancer hospital, they said cancer is far gone. It's not advisable to do any operation. तो मैंने उसको बोला, देख तू साउथ इंडियन है, मदुरई में है, तू जा स्वामी के पास, वहाँ जाके चुपचाप ठहर 2 महीने, प्रार्थना करता जा, तो ठीक हो जाएगा. Swami operated on him, while he was sleeping. Swami operated and told him that you are all right. तो वो तो बेचारा उसी वक्त आ गया मेरे पास, आके बताया. तो मुझे तो कोई हैरानगी की नहीं बात, because by that time Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram was there. We were, we had read. तो Ramchand is going around. One day, Ramchand, Swami called Ramchand upstairs. Now, this is Ramchand's own words. वो मैं बताती कैसे. Ramchand, Swami called him that you have been here so long. Why don't you come up to me to see? तो अपने बड़े आराम से पलंग पे बैठे हुए. What is, वो शेष का था ना. I've got that watch which Swami had given. You, in the beginning, you must have seen Swami's room with a little watch. Swami has given me that. Swami said, go and see everything. He goes to one room. What does he see? There is nothing else, but the room is full of notes of all denominations. And while he's seeing, it all disappeared. Then he goes to the next room, he sees gold. Then he goes to the next room, he sees diamonds. Next room, he goes on seeing all the things. Then he comes to the dining room side and he only sees fruit and he only sees vegetables. He comes and falls at the lotus feet of Swami. Then you know what he did? Instead of going back, he got himself posted at Penukunda so that Swami, when he's coming to Puttaparthi, there was no Koduru at that time. We had to come. So that Swami will stop the car and Saturday, Sunday, I will go and have Swami's darshan.
So in fact, when we hear about what Mr. Ramchand was doing, as Mrs. Ratanlal narrates, his investigative process, he tries to interview every person who is coming. He wants to go and talk to all the people who have received gifts from Bhagawan to find out about the secret behind everything that is happening. In fact, it reminds me of Mr. Raman Rao. You remember when first time he came to Bhagawan in 1965 and his friend sort of asked him to come and he was not at all willing to come. He said, you are taking me to Prashant Nilayam, to this Baba. I don't believe in God, man. Don't ask me to fold my hands. Don't ask me to give up gambling. Don't ask me to stop partying. And with all those conditions he came. And so he was someone who was very, very skeptical. And this is exactly Mr. Raman Rao also does. So he speaks to every person who was coming out of the interview room. And I remember he writes very beautifully in the book Nectar of Love. He says he spoke to one North Indian and he asked him, what did Baba tell you? And that person says, as soon as I went in, he seemed to know everything about me. He created vibhuti and then he created a locket which had the image of that person's Guruji. Oh. Nobody knew about it. He never told Swami anything about it. So that person was flabbergasted. He asked another person. This man was from Bangalore. And this person said, when I went in, Swami could see the amount of sorrow that was there in my heart because this person had lost his son. Swami says, don't worry, you just stay here for 4 days. Your son who has run away from home will come back here and I will call you together as a family for interview. There was another person, again a North Indian, who said that the moment he went inside, Swami started reprimanding this person. And for whatever, something wrong that he had done. And this person started crying. And then Swami then created vibhuti to pacify him and, Swami consoled him and then the person understood his mistake. But Mr. Raman Rao says, every person he saw was coming out of the interview room as a better person. And every person says that Swami told them to serve. He said, whatever it is, whatever he was doing something good. I mean, that is the process of refinement that was happening. So, earlier also we talked about Chamatkar, Sanskar. Right. So, this is what Mr. Raman Rao experienced. And I think something similar is what Mr. Ramchand also went through, as he was trying to interview every person. And finally, to top it all, the kind of such stunning experience Swami gives. And I think with such an experience, what can you do? You can only just bow down and offer yourself at his feet. And what more experience you need to convince yourself of the omniscience, omnipresent power that Bhagawan is, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a phenomenal experience that he has. It is an experience that every devotee has, but not probably through one experience, right? Through a series of experiences. Because I would often think, for most of us, when we first come to Swami's fold, I would often put it this way, that we would get some FAQs from Swami, right? They frequently ask questions of what is your name, where do you come from? But somehow in that interaction, we also knew that he actually knows everything. Right?
Yes.
So even though the person who is being asked knows that he knows everything, Swami of course knows everything, but still he asks and we give an answer, right? And in that relationship between Swami and us gets strengthened. I think that's the beauty, that Maya is brought in for this purpose of endearing
just
the devotee.
So that we can communicate,
right,
we can
to the
feel,
Lord.
connect with him.
Right. I remember a very beautiful episode one of my classmates once narrated. He came from a absolutely quote-unquote non-Sai background. His parents did not know about Swami. He had no clue about, he had never seen Swami. Somebody just told him that here is a good university, you should apply for it. And he landed up in Vrindavan for the BCom course. And you always have the sense that I am the non-devotee and here all of them are so drawn to Swami. You never know till you speak to people that how many people Swami has drawn who have come unwillingly, right? So this boy was seated in Trai one day and Swami just picks him up and Swami asks, "Hey boy, where are you from?" And this boy says, "Swami, I'm from Madanapalli." Right? Madanapalli is a town which is just a few hours from here. So Swami seemed to be excited. Swami said, Madanapalli here. And he said, "Yes, Swami." And then Swami asked him a few other questions. What does your father do? And this and that. So he was replying as, that Swami wants to know. Swami is curious to know about me. And then suddenly Swami asked him, "Hey, do you know this particular hospital in Madanapalli?" And Swami told him a name. Now this boy was excited because he knew that place. He said, "Yes, Swami, I know." Then Swami said, "No, next to that hospital, there is one main road which goes that way." He said, "Yes, Swami, I know." Then Swami said, "If you go that way, the third left if you take, there is one temple over there." I mean, I'm not telling the exact details. Something to this effect. Swami was saying. And this boy was getting excited and also, was wondering where this is all going to. At the end of it, Swami said, "If you go down that lane, the third house, this color gate, this color house, isn't that your house?" And just a few seconds before that, Swami was asking, "Where do you come from?" Right? So I think that is Swami's Maya, and as Swami would sometimes beautifully say, that when he asks question also it is Maya. And the form that we see is also Maya. He's that supreme which is beyond any name and form. The very fact that he has come in a name and form is also a part of Maya, right? He's used Maya to come to us.
Just to give us joy.
Just to give us that joy. And the number of people that he spoke to, one of the persons Mrs Ratanlal mentions in that clip that we played, again, a very simple person who is a servant of a colleague, as she puts it, who was, I think, from the town of Madurai, and who was down with cancer, and the doctors give up, and he comes and stays in Puttaparthi on her advice, and Swami performs surgery in his sleep, and he's completely cured. The beautiful thing is, he goes back and tells Ratanlal and expresses his gratitude. And she says, "Yeah, so what is there in that?" She says, "We have read Satyam Shiv Sundaram and we know this." It's like, that just reminded me of that statement that Swami would often make. Right? Swami would say that you're also surprised by these miracles. He would say that, "Idani naku sahajam," Swami would say. "Meeku ascharyam naku sahajam." It is a surprise for you, but for me, this is mundane. This is regular for me. If you look at it, even for devotees, it is becoming sahajam, right? Those who have lived with Swami and those who have come to know and understand Swami's ways, that even Swami's miracles become sahajam even to the devotees. And that's the beautiful thing. But what a brilliant experience of that, Mr. Ramchand.
In fact, I very vividly remember, recall the session in Trai when, a devotee who was speaking narrated a stunning miracle, and at the end of it, when all of us were looking at Bhagawan, with that additional awesome feeling. And Swami made that statement, this exact statement. Yeah. Meeku Ascharyam, Naku Sahajam. It is something of surprise to you. For me, it is normal. In fact, I remember on that episode of Mr. Raman Rao, as he's interviewing all these people, he actually goes to the place where Professor Kasturi was.
Right,
and Professor Kasturi was typing, So he was not staying in one of the sheds. So Professor Kasturi looks at him very quizzically because this person is standing and staring at him. So Professor Kasturi asks, do you want to talk to me? Is there anything you need? And so Mr. Raman Rao says, no, actually somebody told me that you're writing Baba's biography. You know what? I have spoken to so many people. I've interviewed so many people. If you want, I can give you many stories. and Professor Kasturi says, Mr. Every day Swami gives interview to 40, 50, 100 people, and each one has a breathtaking story. If I were to document what is happening every day, it would be a big volume by itself. Every day would be a huge volume. My job is not to document these miracles. He said, my job is to inculcate faith in human values. Help people inculcate faith in human values. That is the only thing that I am doing. Whatever I am sharing is so that people get inspired to lead a virtuous life. They follow the path of Sathya and Dharma, which Swami is constantly talking about. I mean, that is something we should always remember. When you talk about chamatkar, sanskar, right. All the chamatkars, all these miracles are only so that we can become a better person. That was the only purpose. And
I think in there lies a message for all of us, right?
Yes.
I mean, being in the media center, it's almost impossible to cover the length and breadth of Swami's life and the number of people that Swami has touched.
Absolutely.
Right? And we are talking about one event, some government official who came to Prashanti Nilayam. The amount of things that have happened in Prashanti Nilayam is so difficult to cover. Yeah. And Swami did not confine his activity only to Prashanti Nilayam. Swami traveled extensively, right? Especially in the 60s, in the period that we're talking about. Yeah. Swami spared no effort to reach out to every corner of this state and the country.
300,000 kilometers.
It's unbelievable, right? And we're talking about roads of those days and cars of those days, right? We have better suspensions, better roads. But Swami traveled back-breaking journeys for so many hours to reach out to some of these devotees.
Yeah, wow.
And talking about those travels, right? That brings us to a travel.
Swami's trip to Mumbai in 1967 in March. Now, during that trip, Swami had taken along with him the Veda Pathshala boys. The Veda Pathshala Swami set up in the early 60s.
Right.
And that was sort of the first institution, school you may call it, school or college, where Swami started teaching Vedic hymns to students. And these students had great access to Swami. They would spend all the time with Swami, and that was sort of the original education project of Bhagawan. And Swami himself wrote 2 plays, one on Radha Bhakti, one on Sakubai. Swami directed, and Swami had taken these boys to stage these plays in Mumbai in the Vallabhbhai Patel Stadium. Right. And the governor of Maharashtra was the chief guest, and he loved the performance. He commended the boys and their culture, their values. And it was during this time, Mrs. Ratanlal, who had already known Swami now for 2 years, so she was taking all efforts to serve Bhagawan. So she would cook from her home and bring food for Bhagawan for all the students. So this program happened on 16th March. On 15th March, when she was with Bhagawan, Mrs. Ratanlal made a prayer to Swami because she was seeing the arrangements being made, and she felt that, the stage can be
even better.
Yeah, it should be for Swami. It should be really grand. My Swami is going to give a talk and his students are going to perform. So she went and told Swami, can I make the stage? And Swami said, okay, you make the stage. So she went ahead.
She was saying she was a very, very active social worker.
Oh, yes.
Who used to do a lot of events for cancer treatment.
Yeah, Mrs. Ratanlal was someone who mingled with the elite, as well as who was constantly doing things for the handicapped, the mentally challenged, the polio victims, the cancer victims. So she was a very, very active social worker. She knew people in theater. She had done shows. She was sort of an event manager. So she knew how to get all the things done. So she had that confidence that even if just 24 hours are left for the performance, she said, I will make the stage. And Swami told, okay, go ahead. And so she goes about making the stage. And so she finishes the work, she goes home to get food, and by the time she returns, somebody has undone everything that she has done, and she's shocked, and she says, okay, doesn't matter, I will just get started again. And so she does that, and when she's back again with food for the next session, again everything is pulled down. And she's now really flustered, and she goes and tells Swami, what is this? Can't you tell that senior person allow me? They are not allowing me to do anything. And when she makes that prayer to Swami, Swami laughs, and then Swami calls the senior devotee, and Swami says, I have permitted her, you please allow her to do the decoration and the stage. And that is how Mrs. Ratanlal takes over doing up the stage for Bhagawan's discourse on March 16th, 1967, in the same place. The students do the performance and everyone is so happy. And even as this happened, there was a triumph of joy, her satisfaction that she was able to offer something to Swami. Swami at the same time did something which really blew her off her feet. Right?
Absolutely, because she was in the middle of all of this, right? Cooking for Swami's students, and definitely she must have been cooking for Swami separately, traveling up and down from her home to the place where Swami was staying and the stadium. And of course, she must have been bringing other devotees who were keen to see Swami. When all this was happening, and that little fiasco where Swami resolved it at the end, all of a sudden Swami throws a surprise at her, and Swami says, Mrs. Ratanlal, I am coming to your house for dinner today.
This is 15th March.
Right? And it was already midday. It was 12 in the afternoon when this whole interaction was going on. And she says she was speechless for a moment because she still had things to do, right? She had to go back home and get tea and snacks for the students and the guests. And then, of course, dinner also must be arranged for them. And this... she's just got this stadium thing resolved, so she has to go and get that thing also set right. In the middle of all of this, Swami says, I want to come to your house tomorrow. I mean, tonight, not tomorrow. I'm coming to your house for dinner. And she says very beautifully that she was surprised. She didn't know what to tell Swami. For a moment, she was blank. And then she just prayed to Swami. And she said, I don't know. I just felt that Swami's blessings came upon me in that prayer. And I said, okay, let's go ahead and let's see what can be done. Even as we are narrating all of this, dear listeners, you must be wondering why we are narrating it and not playing her clip. The interviews that we had with Mrs. Ratanlal were done over a period of time. She was very reticent, first of all, to share.
Very hesitant to share.
So some of the recordings are very casual. So we are trying to convey to you and share with you what she had described in that. It may not be suitable to play it as it is. So Vishwa and me are trying to make the best possible way of sharing it with all of you. So coming back to the story, so she prays to Swami, she suddenly feels a burst of inner strength, and she says, let's do it one at a time. So the next task at hand is to go and get tea and snacks ready for the children. So she goes home and she gets this thing ready. She comes back and she goes to the stadium. It's already 5 in the evening. And she's beginning to get stressed about the dinner. What do you do? Swami is coming home for dinner. And 2 of her friends come by to the stadium to see how the arrangements are going on. They look at her and say, what is troubling you? You look a little, stressed out. And then she says, this is what is happening. My Swami is coming for dinner and I don't know what to do. So they tell her, don't worry, you give us the car. And she said that, I always imagined that I will deck up my house with flowers the day Swami comes. Because I love flowers. And so does Swami, right? And those were the days when you could garland Swami, you could have a floral carpet for Swami and all of that. And you don't want to miss out that opportunity. Yes. So she said, but I'm stuck here. I don't have any time.
Swami is coming to your house. You want to do the best. It's a lifetime chance.
And someone like her. Right? We are seeing that
She has all the resources.
And she wants to do even the stage she didn't want to let go as it is. You can imagine if Swami is visiting her house.
Yes.
So these two friends of hers, they tell her that, don't worry, you give us the car keys, we will take care of it. So they take the car keys and they drive away to the market. And of course, after that 12 o'clock meeting, I think she has just managed to buy all the vegetables and give it to the cooks at home and says, this is the thing, do something. And she comes away. So when she returns home, she finds that the whole house has been decked up.
Wow.
With flowers, the way she would have wanted it, with rangolis, grand and beautiful, just like how she would have wanted to welcome Swami, and everything was set. And suddenly, the hours of stress that preceded her coming home seemed so pointless.
Yes.
Because when Swami said, I'm coming home for dinner, I think he also had in his mind how it is going to all happen, right? But we who are in the dark, we are the ones who are stressed out, right? But that is the beauty of faith, when I think of it.
Yes.
There is a very beautiful quote of Tagore, which I'm not quoting verbatim. He says, faith is like the bird that sings when the dawn is still dark.
Wow.
Right? Because the bird knows that the sun is coming, right?
Yes.
So sometimes we are in the dark, but we should still rejoice because we know that He's anyway going to take care. And that's faith. You don't wait for light to show up.
Yes.
You rejoice even when it is still dark. And I think that must have been the lesson she would have got at this point, because she finds that, and a person who is so, a go-getter like her, for a moment she would have realized, or at least listening to this narration, it occurs to us that when Swami says something, everything gets done. Right? And all you have to do is make yourself the least impediment for His will to take place.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that is the beautiful experience she has. And of course, another detail she mentions is Swami comes that day with some of the guests. And one of the guests is Mr. Ramchand, our dear friend, Vigilance Commissioner.
Yeah, in fact, Mr. Ramchand, he gave up his job.
Right.
In the Central Vigilance Commissioner that he was, he gave up that job and he settled down near Penukonda because he said he wanted to have darshan of Bhagawan, because in those days to go to Bangalore, you have to go through Penukonda.
Right.
So he said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life only having darshans of Bhagawan, and he became part of Bhagawan's entourage when Swami was visiting.
Whenever Swami would travel.
Right. Yeah. So, wow. I mean, a really amazing instance, Prem, as we were talking about Tagore's quote on faith, I was reminded of another quote on faith. They say, with little faith, you can get heaven. But with great faith, heaven will come to you. And I think that's what happened here. Here, when Swami said that I am coming, it's, as you said, it's like everything has already been done. Tension happens only if you think, oh, how am I going to do it? If that thought does not come, oh, he said he's going to do it.
Talking about quotes of faith, let me throw in another one, because this was mentioned in Swami's presence and Swami seemed happy with the quote. The quote goes that prayer knocks the doors of heaven, but faith opens it.
Yes.
And when this was mentioned in a talk in Trai, Swami was so happy with it, which is a validation for what is mentioned.
Absolutely. I mean, we all know that when it comes to Bhagawan's work, what is needed is just your availability and you becoming a nobody. That's all is needed. And I think that is a very, very powerful lesson. And what we have seen with Mrs. Ratanlal is, every time there was such a test, because she came up so triumphantly that she was given high responsibilities. Every time there was a test, she did it so well. Anybody else would have told, Swami, not today, Swami, I cannot manage. Swami, please, Swami, how can I do, maybe you would have bungled up the stage, maybe you would have bungled up, 100 things would have gone wrong. But she was so calm. Okay, Swami said, fine, it is going to happen. Right. I think that courage made her to become a better instrument in His hands and take up amazing responsibilities in the mission.
Talking of that, every institution in Prashanthi Nilayam has a story like that, right? The classic one, of course, is the super specialty hospital in Prashanthi Nilayam. I remember that narration of Dr. Sathya. The night before, or I think a couple of nights before, he actually breaks down. He starts crying. He says, this is not going to happen.
Yes.
Swami has said that he wants to inaugurate on November 22nd,
Yes.
and it's not going to happen. And he actually breaks down because he feels that he has failed Swami. And that is when his wife comes up to him and asks, what is the problem? Why are you so worried? And then she tells him something that he knew all the while, but at that moment you forget.
Yes.
She said, Swami is God, and Swami has said that it is going to happen on November 22nd. Why are you worrying over it? Right? He has said it is going to happen, whether you are able to do it or not. Right? And then he says that I actually saw that happening. And that is the case with not merely institutions of Swami. Each one of us and our lives are institutions of Swami. And this is the story of each of our lives.
Yes.
The whole process is, whatever we do, whatever karma we do, whatever sadhana we do, is to ensure that we become less and he becomes more in our lives, isn't it?
Absolutely. Because of the refinement that was happening within her, Swami, as we discussed, made her a beautiful instrument. She was someone who was the channel for so many devotees to come to Bhagawan, given her connections in the political circle, in the circle of high net worth individuals, and in the area of social work. So in this trip of March 1967, one landmark thing that happened was the visit of Rajmatha of Navanagar. She came to see Bhagawan, and it was the first time she was seeing Swami, and lot happened before that. We will come to that, but the reason we are bringing in the Rajmatha story here is, one, Mrs Ratanlal, running an expensive boutique for expensive jewelry and precious stones, she was very well connected with all these people. Rajmatha and her daughter knew Mrs Ratanlal very well. They had also heard about Mrs Ratanlal's love for Bhagawan, and so when they heard that Swami is in Mumbai, so they immediately contacted Mrs Ratanlal, and that is when the Rajmatha of Navanagar had her first darshan of Bhagawan. And for many who do not know, the Rajmatha was the only woman member of the Sri Sathya Sai Central Trust when Bhagawan founded the trust in 1972. She was part of the Education Trust. She was also part of the World Council of Sathya Sai organizations when Swami set up. So she was one of the founding members of the trust of the Sathya Sai organization. And it was through Mrs Ratanlal that Bhagawan brought the Rajmatha in. But what happened prior to that first meeting of the Rajmatha is something very interesting, isn't it, Prem?
Right, exactly. And that is the most beautiful thing about many of these devotees. When you talk about Professor Kasturi, when you talk about the Raja of Venkatagiri, they all had their darshan in the house of Sakama, another great devotee of Swami, when Swami was visiting there. So the way Swami pulls strings, or for that matter, even Karnam Subbamma, the first few devotees who come from the city of Bangalore are actually relatives of Subbamma. It is through common threads such as that Swami pulls. But once drawn to Swami, you suddenly realize that you and Swami are, it's a unique relationship. It doesn't depend on anyone. You have not come because of anybody. Swami knew what he was doing. Swami knew, it's a silly thing to say it that way, but every relationship with Swami was one-on-one. And a devotee who was drawn through this event of Swami visiting Mumbai in 1967 through Mrs Ratanlal is this another great devotee of Swami, Rajmatha. Talking about that background, she was at that time actually the queen. Right? By then she had become the Rajmatha in 1967. But when she actually came to know of Swami, she was the queen of Navanagar because the king was still alive. And this was, we are talking about just after independence. 1947 was independence. At that point, for those of you who are not very familiar with the history of India at that point in time, there were a lot of princely states at that point. They were under the rule of the Britishers, right? They had their princely states, but they were under the British rule. And at the point of time when India got its independence, these princely states had the option of either joining the Union of India or joining Pakistan. So many of these states, one of the earliest states to join India in that sense was Navanagar, I think 1948 or something. A little tidbit, Navanagar was ruled by Ranjit Singh ji till 1933. One of the greatest cricketers, international cricketers from India.
Yeah.
And many might not know the Ranji Trophy, which is the domestic circuit of cricket in India, is named after Ranjit Singh ji, who is the one of the most famous emperors in the 20th century. After his passing away, his nephew, whom we are talking about here, Digvijay Singh ji, who was the husband of Rajmatha, he took over as the king of Navanagar. And it is through him or through a certain episode that was happening in his life that the whole family is drawn to Swami. Digvijay Singh ji is also very well known for 2 episodes. I think now he is becoming more and more popular because of some forwards we get through the internet. That during the World War II, the support that he extended to some of the children of Poland, because he had studied in Poland briefly. He is very popular in Poland. There are streets named after Digvijay Singh ji in Poland, as you can look up that story on the internet. And of course, he is known for his yeoman contribution in the reconstruction of the Somnath temple. Right after India became independent, the Iron Man of India, Shri Vallabhbhai Patel, took up the project of reconstructing the Somnath temple, one of the grandest temples in India, which was destroyed many centuries ago. So it was reconstructed in a very authentic manner, and Digvijay Singh ji was the Raja of Navanagar, also popularly known as Jam Sahib. I think all the rulers of Navanagar were referred to as Jam Sahib. So he contributed, and in fact, the entrance to Somnath temple is named after him as Digvijay
Singh Dwar. Digvijay Singh Dwar.
Digvijay Singh Dwar. And when Swami went to Somnath in 1970, in 1970, Swami inaugurated it. Right. So he is the king of Navanagar, the husband of Rajmatha, whom we are talking about right now.
And the way he came to Swami is interesting. In 1958, someone told him about Bhagawan, a friend told him. And at that point in time, Maharaja was very sick, and they had their own guru, who was a realized soul. So he didn't really think so much about, any other god man. And there was one thing that this friend said somehow, which really struck, and that always remained in his mind, because he said that this Baba gave him a vision of Lord Krishna. And that is something the Maharaja always was very, very interested. That scene captured him. So, is there anyone who can actually give the vision of Krishna? So, that's why there was that curiosity. But at the same time, somebody gave the book Satyam Shivam Sundaram. The Maharani read it, and the Maharani felt maybe it is true, maybe not. Maybe somebody just writing in praise of another god man. Maybe he has some power. So she didn't really think so much about it. Few years went by, but what happened was the health of the Maharaja deteriorated. He was becoming really very sick, and Maharani was getting very concerned. It was at this point that there was this gentleman, Mr. Chudasama, who said that, there is one Mr. Dr. Guardia. This Dr. Guardia does Sai Bhajans. He conducts Sai Bhajans. And since the Maharani was looking for anybody who can give some solace to the Maharaja, so she agreed. She said, okay, fine, Mr. Guardia can come along with his team and they can do bhajans. She thought if it helps to give some relief, that is welcome. And that is how Dr. Guardia comes to their palace and he does bhajans. And the bhajan session goes on so well that the Maharaja feels so much at peace. In fact, the Maharani says that, the Maharaja until then was so restless, and the doctors had told that probably there is no cure now, because they had come to know that he has a stone in the gallbladder, and in those days you didn't have those advanced medical procedures, and because of that the pain was becoming acute. The Maharani did not know what to do, whether to take him to Mumbai, because Maharaja also was a very hefty person. is he in a position to travel? So there were all these concerns. So they knew the condition. The Maharani helplessly was looking at the king, unable to do anything. At this point, the bhajan happens and Maharaja feels so good after that bhajans. And in fact, they spontaneously request, they're saying, can you please come again the next week also and do bhajans? Because it was reaching a point where the Maharaja was saying that, I'm unable to bear this pain. Please, can you ask the doctors to just do something? I don't want to live anymore because it is so much pain that I just cannot take it. I just want to free myself of this pain. Even if it means me losing my life, I don't care. I just want to leave because I can't take this pain. I mean, that is the precarious situation in which they were in. And this bhajan helped to little extent.
Right. And it is at this time, I think, Dr. Guardia gets called away to Puttaparthi. Suddenly, Swami sends word. It seems, when somebody is getting relief, why would Swami do this? Because he had other plans, as we can see. And the health of Jam Sahib was deteriorating badly. The Rajmatha didn't know what to do. So that's when she tried to reach out to their family guru.
Yes.
Right? The other reason probably why they did not take to Swami right away, even after reading Satyam Shivam Sundaram and hearing about Swami, is that they had a guru with whom they had a lot of reverence for. And as we've heard even from Swami, the relationship between a guru and Sishya is supposed to be very unique. Yes. You don't go around looking for other gurus when you have placed your faith in one guru. So that must have been one of the reasons why that hesitancy was there. So she reaches out to this guru in desperation. She says that, the medicines have not worked. So probably we need some grace of the guru to tide over this. But unfortunately, they find that the guru is not in town. The guru is traveling. So she's getting all the more desperate. But 3 days later, the guru returns and he comes to know that the king is very unwell. He comes to the palace, and the moment he sees the king's condition, he says, yes, it's become a bit bad now. So he sends word. He says, get milk and fruits. And when the guru says this, the queen actually thinks probably this is the last moment of the king, and that's why the guru is asking for milk and fruits. But when it is brought, the guru is sitting in front of the king, and suddenly he does something which was not expected. He brings out a roll of paper. They don't know where it came from because he did not bring anything when he came. Nothing was there under the cushion on which he was seated. But he brings out this roll of paper and he hands it to them. And when they open it, it is a picture of Swami.
Yes.
They are stunned because they had never spoken about Swami with the Guru, even though they had, had this information about Swami had reached them. They had never discussed it with him, nor had he brought up the topic of Swami ever with them. Where did this come all of a sudden? He brings a picture of Swami, gives it to the queen, and he says, keep it next to the bed of the king and offer worship to it every day, and make sure even the king worships the picture every day, and he will be better. So now it becomes a command of the Guru, right? It's not a choice that you have. So that's what they do, and the moment the picture is put next to the bed of the king, overnight he actually feels much better.
Much better.
And the next evening, another surprising event happens. They get a letter from Puttaparthi, from one Mr. Dikshit, whom they don't have any prior acquaintance with. And the letter says that I am writing to you on the insistence of Bhagawan. He has said he wants me to convey to the queen that she need not worry. The king's health will become better, and Swami will take care of his health. And there was also a packet of vibhuti in that letter, and the letter mentioned that Swami says that this vibhuti should be applied where the king is feeling his pain, and nothing should be, you don't have to worry about anything. And literally overnight, after the vibhuti is applied, the king's pain vanishes. He feels much better, and almost within 24 hours, the king is back to normal.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, what is very interesting is the king is free of pain, physically, yes, but the Maharani says that was not everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
What really stunned the Maharani was the king was a completely different person. The king had changed as a person. a king who used to get irritated with little things, a king who used to lose his temper, he became a person who was very calm. Maharani says that it was almost as if, he was a new person. He had become so calm, so composed, that it almost felt like Swami gave a new person to the Maharani. And that was such a blessing from Bhagawan, the king becoming well, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, psychologically.
And something very similar happens with Walter Cowan, isn't it?
Oh yes, when Swami gives back
after his resurrection, he changes completely.
Yes, completely.
I mean, already a spiritual person, but there was a marked difference in his behavior.
Absolutely. And the only thing that happened was, now the Raja says, I want to see Bhagawan. I want to see Bhagawan. Now the Raja wants to spend time reading scriptures. Now the Raja wants to listen to Satsang. He wants more bhajans, more namasmarana. And he says, I want to see Swami. And Maharani tries to find out if Swami is in Pune or Bombay, anywhere near. And they learn that Swami is not there anywhere close. And they are constantly thinking how to see Swami, how to see Swami. And it is during this period that the war breaks out between India and Pakistan, and so that's when they are unable to do anything.
Right, it's 1965. Those of you who know, I think it's also called the Second War of Kashmir, and Nawanagar is a kingdom which is in the western borders of India. They are very close to Pakistan, and during a war, any enemy nation is only trying to effect as much damage in your country as possible, so that it hurts you, right? So they were targeting some of these princely states and palaces which were there. So this was, as we were saying, 1965. I think August, September, the period where it was maximum was about 17 days, and it is considered as one of the most where armored vehicles were used, the territorial battle on the ground, which was seen after the Second World War, right? The most severe one which was seen. And also it was happening in the backdrop of the Cold War. So the international community was looking at it. So one of the things that was happening was the Pakistani Air Force was trying to raze to the ground the palace of the Jam Sahib, the kingdom of Nawanagar. And in fact, apparently it was broadcast on Pakistan radio that the palace of Nawanagar has been razed to the ground and the entire royal family has been decimated. But what they didn't know was the shells were dropped in the palace compound, but nobody was harmed, not even the palace.
The shells never exploded.
The shells never exploded because they didn't know that Swami's grace was there upon them. In fact, not just the royal family of Nawanagar, Swami had in fact reached out to many officers in the Air Force and the families who had officers in the Air Force. In fact, one of the devotees narrates that Swami actually appeared in front of her when her husband was in the Air Force and the war was going on. Swami appeared and assured her, don't worry, I am there with all of them and they will be fine. And this news actually reaches some of the officers in the Air Force. That gives them a lot of confidence.
In fact, at the right moment when Swami appeared to the wife of this Air Force officer, there was a shell that was about to hit
where he was posted.
Right. And it just fell a few yards away. So all of this gave a lot of confidence to the people who were participating in the war too, and also the family of the royal family of Nawanagar. Through these small episodes, they were being drawn closer and closer. It is not about merely life or health, right? When you look at the bigger picture, when you look at the family of the Jam Sahib, it is not that Swami giving life is not the miracle. Swami giving the opportunity to come to Swami in life is the miracle, right? Because it is not that he lived for 100 years after that. I mean, I'm not going to reveal what happens, but it is not that Swami extended the life by another century. Swami extended life long enough so that you find the fulfillment of coming to Swami. And I think that is the grace that Swami showered on this family. Wow. I think every time it happens in our lives, the moment we come to Swami, and later on when we connect the dots, then we realize how many times Swami has protected us, Even now, of the 100 times Swami would have protected us, probably twice or thrice would have actually consciously known. And
Swami
I think
would have acknowledged it openly.
Yeah, so I think that's what was happening. Swami has been taking care of this family for generations. So, but now once the war ended, they were very keen to come to Prashanti Nilayam, and that's when the Jam Sahib comes to Puttaparthi. And in those days, with all the rudimentary facilities, that does not deter him. And Swami showers the Maharaja with so much love. There was a chair placed for him in front of the interview room. Actually, generally in those days, chairs are not placed. But Swami ensures that the Maharaja is comfortable with whatever the facilities Puttaparthi could offer then. And Swami gives him interview, speaks to him with so much love. And Swami says, "You don't stay here for long, you go, I will come. And the Maharaja was so happy that first physical meeting with Swami, because Swami said, our connection is not of just this life. Our connection existed for very long. I know you for so many years." And then Swami said, "I know how good a king you are. I know how you have been working to rebuild the Somnath temple. I know how much your subjects love you. I know how you have been taking great pains to ensure the welfare of the people of Jamnagar. In fact, this Maharaja, even after the kingdom merged with the Indian Union, the people still loved to recognize them as the Raja. They still wanted to him to be the leader, even though officially he was not the leader, because they just felt that, we want you, because that is the kind of care and love that he had showered on the subjects. And Swami was reflecting that. Swami was saying, "I'm so happy." And then the Maharaja, one thing that we did not mention to you was, when the Maharaja became sick, apart from his health becoming really bad, the other thing that was happening is he was slowly losing eyesight. Day by day, he was becoming blind. And so on that occasion, he asked Swami for eyesight, to restore his eyes. And Swami says, I know why you want the eyes. You want your eyes back because you want to have the darshan of the Lord in Dwarka. I know how much you love Lord Krishna and how much you have done for the Somnath temple. Do you need your outer eyes to have darshan of the Lord? Do you need outer vision to see Dwarkadhish? Don't worry. Swami says, I will give you the darshan of Dwarkadhish. And Swami says, it is my responsibility to see Dwarkadhish. You need inner vision, not outer vision. I will grant you that darshan. Swami emphasizes, that is my responsibility. I will be with you at the right time in your palace. Go now. So with this assurance from Bhagawan, extremely delighted, completely healed, physically, mentally, emotionally, the Maharaja returns to Jamnagar. And as we already discussed, it was a new life for him, absolutely a new life. He lived for a little time. What happened and how he had darshan of Bhagavan and how Swami completely changed the direction of that family, of that entire clan. We will come to that in the coming episode of this series, the series on Mrs Ratanlal, a diamond of a devotee. Thank you so much for being with us, and we hope and pray that all these beautiful glimpses of the lives of these exalted souls that Bhagavan is giving us this opportunity to soak in helps us to cultivate that love, that faith, that devotion, so that we too can learn to diminish ourself, our little self, and glow in His love. Thank you so much. Sairam.